What's up, my nerds? Check it out.
What's up, my nerds is right, because I'm a tire nerd, and so is my guest for today, Ken Avery from Vittoria Tires. If you've been following us on Facebook, if you're on the STL Enduro page, you know how excited I am about this because I love mountain bike tires. So real quick, I'm just going to let you know some key points in this podcast. We start out, we talk a little bit about Ken's background. We talk about the Maxxis Minion DHF that he had a hand in design 19 years ago. So, you know, I bet most of you listening have had a Minion at some point. We talk a little bit about Ken's career background. Then we get into the Vittoria lineup at about 14 minutes with the Agaro tire. And, you know, talking about the different tires in their lineup, we go through things they do differently. But if you look at those tires, you'll be able to see, okay, well, maybe I don't run a Vittoria, but I run something similar. And we really get into what these tires do well and why. And then I would say the super nerdy stuff starts about 17 minutes. 35 minutes in, we talk about why a mud tire in the Midwest is probably not what you need, even when it's pouring down rain. And at 37 minutes, we talk about why I have probably been wrong about the DHF and my opinion of it, even though I haven't been a huge fan of it, but it might have to do with the rim width I was running and me not using the tire as designed. But anyway, we get super in depth, and I think in this podcast, everybody should listen. If you do, you'll be very well equipped to pick out the right tires for you in the future, regardless of brand. But I mean, shoot, I'm going to try some Vittorias now, and I bet you will too. All right, that being said, let's get right into the podcast. Hi, and welcome to a very special edition of the World's Okayest Mountain Bike Podcast. I've been teasing it for a couple of weeks, or I guess about a week and a half now, and it's really happening. Someone I have found that might be a bigger tire nerd than me. I would think so. I would hope so. I hope I'm not disappointed. I doubt I will be, but we have Ken Avery with Vittoria Tires on today. Ken, how you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for coming on, because this is a mountain biking dream come true. I care more about this than suspension tech. I care more about this than carbon tech or anything like that. I love tires. And so when you agreed to come on, my friends were just like, it was like I had just had a baby and they were congratulating me. They're like, oh, we're so happy for you, man. That's so great. Anyway.
I'm just a tire nerd from New Hampshire, man. whatever floats your boat, it's all good.
Well, like we talked about, a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, no matter how good your technique is, once the tires let go, they let go. And so, to me, that's something that's harder to overcome than any other limitation on the bike, except for maybe like brakes that don't work or something. But anyway, so what we're going to do today, Ken's going to give us a little background. We're going to go through the Vittoria lineup. And I think when we do that, you'll be able to make sort of categorical connections to other tires that are similar. And then we'll get into some listener questions. And then I can't tell you what it is until June 15th, but we're going to talk about something coming up in Vittoria's lineup that I'll publish on the 15th. So anyway, Ken, at least this is how I got other people's attention, is you are, I guess, were you the primary designer on the Maxxis Minion DHF?
Wow, getting right into it. I got to give credit to Colin in that we both had a hand in the Minion. I was the product designer at Maxxis during that time. I worked for them for 10 years and did a lot of their product line that they still sell. Colin was an athlete. As with any project, you have an athlete you work with. I myself was an athlete. I had a UCI downhill license. We used to race on the national circuit and all that stuff. But, I designed tires for Dave Mira, Allison Dunlops, Hans Ray, all these other kind of like people in the sport that are well known. And on this particular project, while Colin didn't have like a title of any sort at the time.
Now, let me interrupt you just a sec. When you say Colin
Bailey. Yep.
Colin Bailey. Okay.
Yep. He was on the Maxxis team, and he was definitely somebody who was influential, and he had some ideas on how to improve things. So Russell Webb was running the Maxxis bicycle division at the time, And so he kind of had allowed Colin to share some of his ideas with the product team. He had an initial sketch that looked a lot different than what the tire ended up being, but it was good direction, and it was the kind of thing. My job was really to take that and to translate it from a rider's language, which I could speak, to a production language, which I could speak. And that's the super duper short version. But if you were to, I have the original mold drawing for the Minion DHF. I'm not allowed to share it for obvious reasons, but both of our signatures appear on it. And if Maxis were ever to share that, you would see that.
Well, and I just throw that out there because I think that's maybe it's kind of your instant credibility, is because I can't think, and this is a question that actually has come up, is my buddies and I were trying to think of a mountain bike product that has had the staying power. I mean, was it 2001 that went to market?
The 2001 season was when we drew it, prototyped it, and it really hit in 2002. But it was I think technically maybe a 2001 product or something like that. But yeah, the date on the drawing is in 2001. It is crazy to think about how old that is.
Like, we couldn't think of anything in cycling or that you say, oh yeah, that's pretty much the exact same as it was, 19 years ago.
Sure.
Now I promise we'll move on from the DHF after this last question about it is just what is it about that tire that was so, what strengths did it capture that I guess were so revolutionary or whatever that has given it this ability to just stick around compared to what was available on the market at the time?
Yeah, the quick answer is it was just more aggressive. Mountain bike tires back then, you're talking literally 20 years ago. So it's crazy to think about what bikes looked like back then. To your point earlier, as far as staying power, right? But back then, bikes had narrower tires. It was crazy to have, anything more than a 2.5. That was the downhill size, and it still basically is. But in terms of cross country bikes, everybody was running 2.0s or 2.1s, So another project I did, which I'm not going to name, but basically was a cross country project, and the first size that we came out with was a 2.2, which was really risky. You know what I mean? It was really funny. So that was kind of the era. Tires were very small, is my point. And they didn't have the tread depth or the casing supports that downhill tires had. And so it was a platform that you could really use to prove your performance on the race circuit at a high level. But then at the same time, we could take some things from moto, and a lot of people, in that era especially, you're talking about the Sean Palmer era and that whole thing. A lot of guys like to bite off of moto style and style from other kind of action sports. That was a tire that was definitely influenced by that. And it was really purpose built to just do one thing, which was to grip. And a lot of tires since then have kind of followed suit and looked at things differently as far as directional patterns and things like that.
So you're with Vittoria now. How long have you been with Vittoria? And just as brief as you want to make it, because
Sure.
We're a little limited on time, but just tell us whatever you can about your transition to Vittoria, and then we're gonna get deep in the weeds.
Yeah, man. I was with Maxis for 10 years on their product team, but basically before that I was an athlete that did testing with them and things like this as I kind of came up as a racer. So when I got out of college, they kind of offered me that job, and it was kind of a dream as a 23-year-old, I was 23 in 2001, which is kind of funny to think about. But anyway, and then, we did a lot of different products in terms of, I did BMX road products, cyclocross products. Gravel didn't exist at the time. And then obviously a ton of cross country and downhill tires. 10 years came and went. Basically Vittoria, I approached Vittoria originally because I was thinking about doing my own tire brand, and being in the industry and being a competitor, I knew that Vittoria makes tires for a lot of other companies. And I'm just going to leave it at that, but I can tell you that you've ridden them and you didn't know that they were made by Vittoria. But I knew that, being an insider. And so I actually approached Vittoria and said, listen, I know that you guys have the very best quality control in the industry. if I'm going to put my name on something, I want it to be on your, coming out of your factory, really. And they said, well, geez, why don't you just kind of revamp our mountain bike line and reinvent it? So at the time it was called GX. And we folded that into the Vittoria name and came out with first a number of cross-country tires, because Vittoria primarily was known as a road brand. And so we kind of looked at the entire spectrum of tires and categories, and we wanted to start from an endurance end because it was most close to road, and then move in the direction of trail and enduro. And one of the first tires I did with them was the Vittoria Barzo, which ended up winning mountain bike world championships a couple years later in 2015 under Pauline Ferrand-Prévot. So I mean, it was immediately proven. And since then, we've added graphene, 4C, and then a slew of other tire designs. And so it's been 8 or 9 years now that I've been with Vittoria. It's gone by pretty quick.
If you want even more depth on that, Single Tracks did a podcast with Ken, came out several weeks ago, where there's a little more career detail and some things like that. We don't have time to get into all that today on ours. I want to kind of go a little bit of a different direction, but I'd encourage, if you want to know more, check out the Single Tracks podcast, and they get into that. But where I want to go now is I want to get into primarily the trail enduro lineup that Vittoria has. And, we'll describe tires as you go. It's pretty simple to just look at them on the website and you'll have the idea quickly. But as we do, we're going to talk about conditions they're meant for, riding styles, how to pair them up, combinations. And then I'm going to have we're going to get into some super nerdy stuff, so buckle up. All right. So right now on the Vittoria website, we've got 4 tires that are in the trail enduro category. We've got the Agaro, the Moda, Martello, and the Morsa.
Yep.
And I guess some of the best way to start is just we'll start with the Agaro, which I think is pretty new.
It is, yeah.
And it looks to me like that's something that is probably more intended for a rear tire if you're aggressive. I mean, I guess it would work for a front. But just real quick, just describe sort of what you intend for that tire to be used for, and then I've got some questions.
Yeah, man, for sure. The Agaro literally it's like a variation of the word grip or grasp in Spanish. And what we wanted to do with that was basically make a tire that could like grip onto wet, slippery rocks and things like that, and hard pack surfaces. So it was going to have a lot of smaller knobs that would have a maximized surface area basically on whatever surface you were riding on. And it would also work, it would be compatible with e-bikes. So you'd have from a wear perspective. But really the key with the Agaro is that it sits in the trail category. It's not an enduro tire. It's only offered in the trail casing, which is a single ply casing with reinforcement on the sidewalls and an APF insert as well above the bead. So it's not available in the 2-ply enduro casing. Basically, it's meant to sit between cross country and enduro, and it takes things from both of those categories. So basically, our tagline for this is enduro inspired performance meets XC efficiency. So a lot of cross country guys have been using this tire as a front tire or even front and rear, but as a step up from some of the regular cross country tires. If you're definitely concerned with, obviously lowering rolling resistance, but at the same time, like you're willing to trade a little bit of that for a whole lot more grip, then the Agaro is a great tire. Likewise, though, like trail guys and enduro people have been using the Agaro as a rear tire, as you mentioned. It is a bit rounder profile than a true enduro tire, and it doesn't have as an abrupt side channel between the center and side tread. So it's going to roll a little faster. It's going to be very smooth in transition, but it's not going to have that like ultimate bite like a true enduro tire like the other tires we have in our line do.
Okay, so when I was looking at the Agaro, the pictures, in place of most tires have a ramped leading edge on their center knobs.
Yeah.
Instead of a ramp, you have these. It looks like a stair step, right?
Yep.
It looks like the knob sits on top of a bigger knob.
Yeah.
Now, I'm assuming that you can accomplish almost the same rolling resistance benefits doing that, but still have that kind of square edge to bite. But how much? I mean, I don't know how deep your testing goes into rolling resistance. I'll have some questions about rolling resistance coming up, but
Sure.
I mean, how does that compare to a ramp? How much is
Yeah.
the disadvantage, or is there one?
So you need to think about it from a rider perspective, as with
Mhm.
all mountain bike products should be designed from a rider perspective, right? I mean, there's no use in putting something out there that isn't considered this way. To answer your question, we have a whole lot of different machines in our factory that you can see a bunch of videos actually on our YouTube channel if you go to the Vittoria Tires YouTube channel. But we have rolling resistance, we have wet weather testing, we have wear testing, all sorts of different machines, abrasion testing, things like this. So we definitely take rolling resistance very seriously. You have to understand, we are the largest producer of cotton road tires. Cotton road tires only exist to roll fast, right? I mean, that's the idea is that a cotton thread is a higher TPI than a nylon thread. That's the reason we make them, right? So rolling resistance is very important to Vittoria. And you'll see that actually throughout all the tread designs I've done with Vittoria, because they all roll really fast, despite the fact that you can still create grip, which is actually kind of the biggest challenge that there is. How do you make something roll fast and still grip, right? So to answer your question on this Agaro staircase, first of all, I love that you picked that up, and it's definitely something that matters. So at high speeds, or just not even high speeds, anything above slow speeds, really, like really medium speeds and above, really, it's going to roll just like a ramp. It doesn't make any noise. It doesn't, and to back up, some tires you'll see will have, a ramped leading edge, and that exists purely to try to make a tire roll faster. But the downside of that is that when you go to climb, if you're at that point where you're putting out power and the tire is fighting for traction and it's just about to lose traction and slide out, that ramp is not going to help you. It's not going to dig in. All it's going to do is make it lose traction quicker when you're trying to climb up something steep. So when you're doing that, in that moment, you're usually at a slower speed, super high torque situation, and it's oftentimes a very critical thing. You could be trying to pedal kick off something. You could be trying to just like make it up and over an obstacle, and that little moment is really critical. So the staircase offers effective edges, which is any edge that's loaded is called an effective edge, and that effective edge can bite, but at speed it rolls like a ramp. So at low speeds it bites, at high speeds it rolls fast.
And I wonder, the first place I ever saw anything like that was actually several years ago when Dunlop came out with their motocross line, that rear tire. I actually have one on my motocross bike. I don't know what they called them then. I know right now it's like the 3S. The side knobs have like these little raised knobs within a knob to like give you a little extra. Now, I think what you're doing is for a different reason, right? They don't care about rolling resistance. They just want maximum grab. But I can see, I mean, it totally makes sense. You get to keep your square edge, but still have sort of a gradual transition into the knob that should roll faster. But here's a question I've always wondered, and because the next tire we're going to talk about is the Martello.
Sure.
And what it looks like to me is most tires, all cross-country tires, whatever, they have small knobs, not just in like that they're short, but they have small diameters. Like they're these little squares.
Mm-hmm.
And they're sometimes more or less tightly spaced. And then I look at the Martello and it has like these big square knobs, and they don't necessarily look super tall, but they're fat, right? But when it comes to rolling resistance, what I wonder is what makes a bigger difference? The spacing of the knob, like why is it a small knob, tightly spaced, or even farther spaced, rolls any faster than like a fat knob that's spaced tightly? Because in my mind, I'm thinking, well, it's really the gap between the knobs that should make the more difference. But like what?
So I'm gonna open your bike tire nerd mind a bit here with this.
I wish you would.
Yeah, man. No, for sure. So it's not just about the height of the knob or the space between what's called a tread period, which is when a pattern repeats itself. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It actually also comes down to deformation. And so realize that your casing is going to deform a lot, especially under load, under cornering loads, braking, climbing, things like that. And then your knob sits on top of that casing. And then if you have siping within each knob, which is basically just an engineered groove of some sort, and those sipes are designed to allow flex in a direction, a specific direction. So there's a lot going on here, and I understand that. But basically, one of the things that I looked at differently after coming to Vittoria was the casing deformation. Again, it goes back to cotton road tires with Vittoria, right? Where one road tire versus another, I mean, the tread's not vastly different. It's not very deep. How can one road tire roll so much faster than another road tire? And it really comes down to that casing deformation. So when you hit a crack in the road on a road bike, if the casing is more flexible and more supple, it deflects less, and therefore it has less rolling resistance. Okay, so the same is true on the mountain bike. And so it's not just about casing material, because obviously we're talking about tread designs here, but what happens is how the tread design affects casing deformation. So if you can
if I can guess, we'll see if I'm tracking you. A smaller knob is probably going to have less, it's sort of less reinforced, so it might deform a little easier when it hits something instead of getting that bounce back. When you add that up like thousands and thousands of times, in just a minute of riding, then it adds. So that's what, because I've always wondered, I'm thinking, well, it can't just be about how much rubber is, rubber on the ground, so to speak.
Right. Now, hold on. Now, that said, though, you also have to think a couple things on Martello, because Martello, for as aggressive as it looks, rolls silly fast. That's one thing everybody who rides that tire actually is like, I can't believe that it actually rolls as fast as it does. And that has zero ramps or anything like that. So there's a couple other things going on.
We have a trail builder just south where I live, Alex Scott, who's, you probably never heard of him, but in the Midwest, he's very well known. He's built some stuff, and he told me to tell you that the Martello is probably his favorite go-to tire. Like he said, just awesome, thank him for making my favorite tire brand.
Dude, that's amazing. That's so good to hear that. I love hearing that, because as a rider myself, all I want to do, my whole mission is to like make it more fun for people to ride their bike. And so, I mean, that makes traction, that means longevity in the product and dependability and all those things. But the Martello is quite unique, and it was actually the first tread design I had done this thing with, which I'm going to get into in just a minute. I'll try to make it as concise as possible. But basically, that was the first tire I did that had progressive sipe width. So if you think about this, a sipe is just like a groove in the rubber, right? Well, a bigger groove allows more flex than a smaller groove because there's more air inside the groove, right? So if you stack them, so you do like a small, medium, and big sipe on top of that big square moto-looking knob, the leading edge is compliant, sure, but it rolls faster than the trailing edge, which has a bigger sipe right before the trailing edge of that knob. So under rolling kind of forces, it rolls fast, but it's still tacky for climbing because it still does have a sipe on it, right? But under braking, it's like an anchor. Like it just that trailing edge of that knob. In other words, the trailing edge of the knob is much softer than the leading edge of the knob.
Right. Which I think a lot of people forget, that when you lock up that back brake or whatever, it's actually, you got to look at your tread pattern in reverse, because that's the way it's hitting the ground at that point.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt there.
No, dude, not at all, man. It's totally, I'm glad you picked up on that. So then on that tire, then you take that exact same idea and turn it 90 degrees, and you have your cornering knob. So the inside effective edge of the cornering knob is going to be super gummy, but the outer edge is stable. So I challenge you to actually take some of our competitors' tires and push on the side knob, and you'll just see the entire thing flop over or rip off eventually. And you won't see that happen on a Vittoria tire because there's two things. First of all, the progressive sipe width pattern, but the other thing is 4C. So we're the only company that has a 4C, a four-headed extruder basically, but it's the ability to put 4 compounds on a tire. And so what that allows for, and again, especially on the Martello, it's unique in that you have a separate base and surface compound on every knob. And so you have 2 compounds in the center tread and 2 compounds on the side tread, base and surface, right? So now you have progressive sipe width from the leading and trailing edge in the center or side to side on the side knobs. And then you also have a stack of durometers from the casing towards the surface. So it's asymmetrical flex in 2 directions. And that's part of the reason that tire works really well.
Yeah. And, you know, if you're listening, just go to Vittoria.com and you'll find them quick. But the Martello, it's got like these big wide square blocks, looks like a moto tire. But I have noticed the it doesn't look like, and I've seen them in person, that the knob height, especially in the center part of the tread, is really that tall. So, I mean, I guess my question is, like, how much do you need a tire to dig before it becomes pointless? Because if you're in like bottomless gravel or whatever, well, a little dig, a lot of dig, if you're still kind of in the same situation. Well, let me put it this way. So what is that tire good for, and where would it not be so great?
I mean, it's not meant to be a straight up mud tire. I can tell you that. It's really good in hard pack to mid type scenarios. Which is to say, you have enough surface area on top of that block that repeats to really create friction, basically to make that traction. It's not just about the edge. It's also, especially with rocks and things like it, a rubber tire doesn't dig into rocks, right? So you have to think about how it creates friction at the surface. And that progressive sipe width absolutely does that. The graphene 2.0 compound is wet weather optimized. We're the only company using graphene in our tires. It's a very complex process, so I understand why. A lot of people ask me about graphene and say, is it marketing hype? And my response to that is always, listen, I mean, Popular Science wrote an article about our tires. Popular Science doesn't care about bicycle marketing. They're a science publication, right? So the other thing that I always say is that we tell you what's in the tire. Google graphene. It's used in a lot of different places for a lot of really good reasons. And I mean, other brands will use a marketing term for their compound name. We literally tell you what's in it.
So let's get through these next tires real quick, because I don't want to leave them out, because I keep being tempted to get into more of the in-depth questions. So the next tire I had on my list was the Moda.
Sure.
To me, it looks like you took a Martello and like took away some knobs and opened it up, and that's what it looks like to me. I mean, it's like we're going to make a mud tire out of the Martello, and there it is.
So the Moda really started life as a cut spike type study. A lot of people were taking like proper old school mud tires, which were very deep in tread but very spiky, and cutting the knob so that it had a lot of space, but it still had a spike. And the reason was because basically mud tires worked well in soupy mud, but people started quickly realizing that underneath the mud there's rocks and roots.
That's exactly what I was going to say. In mountain biking, mud is not nearly as clear cut as it is, let's say, in a downpour at a motocross track or a sand track.
Oh man, yeah.
It's like it's some mud, but then it's also like, if you're on, I just did an enduro back in March in the St. Louis crowd. A lot of us were there, and it was the wettest conditions enduro I've ever done. But I would not call it a mud race. It was more like a slick rock slab race is what it really was. So you're thinking like, well, do I need a mud tire or do I need a hard pack tire? Because the surface I'm on is mostly hard pack, but it's just got a bunch of water on it, basically.
So basically, like if you try to run any sort of a spike tire, even a cut spike tire on rocks, it's like trying to play basketball on ice skates. I mean, it's just pointless. And so what we wanted to do is say, okay, we needed to make space so that the tire would shed the mud. But on the top of each one of those spikes, we wanted to have that progressive sipe width like the Martello has to maximize the friction on that little surface area you actually have that does not dig into the rock, right? So it's always going to be on the surface. So that was kind of the design challenge on the Moda. And if you look at like even like Pink Bike's review on that, Mike Levy rode that tire, and he was like, it's more of an all-around tire. It looks like a mud tire, but it's like capable as an all-around tire, and it actually rolls pretty fast too. So I thought that was really cool.
It reminds me, all the daylight between the knobs, but without the knobs being like truly spike. You know, it kind of reminds me of in a way of like a WTV Vigilante, at least the center knobs. Like I've had some of those, and there's a lot of daylight between the knobs, but I wouldn't say they're hyper aggressive, and they have one huge sipe in every knob. The corner knobs on that it's basically it's like two mini tall knobs next to each other. And in certain conditions, like kind of when you're not at super high speeds and it's off camber and weird, those deform a lot, I guess, and really do hook up. But sometimes I feel like there's a little too much daylight when it's harder pack and you're starting to gain speed. It's kind of
it needs to be a balance, and it also you need to control the deformation. I mean, again, going back to 4C puts a stiffer base compound, so you have this progressive flex through the height of that knob versus having it just all leverage over and fold over at the base and rip off.
Right.
So our tires really typically they wear from the surface down to the casing like a car tire would. I mean, it'd be a pretty bad thing if you were driving down the street on your car and your side tread ripped off. Like, you know what I mean?
Well, kudos to you, because I will say the Moda and Martello, those are, in the world of mountain bike tires, a lot of times there's just certain categories that start to look the exact same, and those two definitely have a unique look about them. Now, the next tire though, the Morsa, I'm just gonna be honest. Yeah. I look at it and I think High Roller 2, like very similar looking to me to a High Roller 2.
See, I look at it and I say it looks like I designed that because.
Well, I was guessing. I don't know. I mean, you were at Max's, so it makes sense.
But no, I'm just kidding. I mean, the original High Roller was actually I should say, heavily inspired by an old Michelin tire.
Okay.
And so Maxis could also be or I should say, even whatever, the designer could be guilty of all that as well. But at the end of the day, really what it comes down to is a format that works, right? I mean, however you want to kind of slice and dice the stories.
Well, that work good? What does the Morsa work good for?
Yeah, so really it's a dry conditions tire. I mean, that tire is, if you're in Southern California, I mean, and or even like, a drier Arizona, a place like that where you're going to have like a kind of sandy type, a scenario. So basically the entire center tread is ramped. And it's not going to be like a mud bog climbing tire kind of a situation at all, but it has a very sharp side channel. So basically between the center tread and the side tread, there's a very pronounced channel that allows for the inner effective edge on the side knob to be completely uninterrupted. And that's the reason that it's shaped that way. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a few other tires on the market that look similar, but, it's definitely something you wanted to do for that reason. So, and the idea is that, you have a range of tires in the ones that you just mentioned that work in dry, mixed, and wet.
Okay, so there's the lineup, folks. Now we're gonna really get into some issues. And some of this applies to Vittoria tires, I'm sure, and some of it doesn't, but just tires in general. And it's the thing I want to lead off with is what you just mentioned about that continuous channel.
Yeah.
Okay. So many downhill front specific tires, they do have that wide gap between your center knobs and then your side knobs that create that channel. Yeah. And I feel like, at least in my experience, I hate that. No, yeah. So what is it? This is kind of the question I have is, do I, Klint, need to change my riding style because I'm missing out on some great advantage, or is it just not for everybody? What is the deal with this huge gap that leaves? I mean, yeah. I know some of what you're gonna say, but at the same time, I'm just like, I just can't.
Come on. Well, there's some reasons, but as with anything, particularly in the bike industry, it tends to get taken too far, and really the art is finding the balance. You could say the same thing about tire sizes, rim widths, all sorts of things, head angles, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's sort of like a balance that works very well, and then there's extremes that people like to try to market. So anyway, so the reason, number one, let's go. Look, why does it exist in the first place, right?
Right.
And the reason that channel exists in the first place is to basically give that side knob room to pack dirt against it so that it can work. If there was no channel there, the effective edge on that side knob would not have enough room to pack dirt against it to create that grip, that like claw type effect in the corner, right? Now, if you have too much room, then you have a very weird, vague dead spot between upright and full lean angles. And so what happens is you go into the corner, particularly if you're not like in that like forward, like attack position,
Mm-hmm.
that like, which is to say, like if you're kind of like tentatively leaning back and
Mm-hmm.
you kind of go into a corner, a tire, if it's too much spacing, can get very drifty, understeer, in other words. Now, if you look at guys who race moto, they go into a corner, they put their leg out, they put all the weight on their handlebars, and they push that front tire to make it grip, right? So
Oh,
if you have that
absolutely.
riding style, I'm sorry, go ahead, dude.
No, I was just agreeing about the
Oh
moto
yeah,
thing.
yeah. I mean, it's the kind of thing where like, if you have that riding style and you have a tire that is, well balanced in that way, you can push on it and make it grip. In fact, it works pretty much on every tire. You'll always find the limit quickly that way. Now that said, it works until the tire fails essentially. So even the most proven tires on the market, eventually what's going to happen is either the casing is going to deform to the point where the side knobs fold over, or the side knob will fail itself. It'll rip off or just fold over on the casing. And so to get around that, as a designer, what you want to do is, I always make sure that the outer edge on that side knob is reinforced. It has sort of something that really holds it up from the outside. And then also it's siped on the inside. So whatever air pressure you like to run it at, that inside effective edge just mechanically will always be softer. If you were to throw a durometer gauge on the inside versus the outside of the side knob, you'll see like a big difference. If you're a tire nerd, you should get a durometer gauge. They're cheap and they're kind of fun to play with.
Here's a theory I have with maybe why I didn't get along with a certain extremely popular tire that's like that we've already talked about.
Yeah, yeah.
But when I bought this tire, I bought the 2.5 version, which I believe it was originally designed as like a 2.3. Well, I took that 2.5 and I mounted it on like a 25 millimeter internal rim. And so when you look at the tire profile, it was very rounded. And in a way, it seems to me that I actually, and since you took a design that probably was intended to be a little narrower, you put it in a wider frame, it only exaggerates, and on a narrower rim where I'm getting kind of this balloon effect, it's not really square, that maybe that was exaggerating that channel even more than it was intended to be in the first place. Does
Yeah,
that
I
make
can see what
sense?
you're
Am I
saying.
onto something there?
Well, so there's a couple things. If you bring the beads of a tire together, the pattern will fan out in cross section.
Mm-hmm.
God, if that's not the dorkiest thing I've said all day, I don't know what it is. But anyway, the bottom line is like your side knobs are probably a bit further down the casing that
Mm-hmm.
way, right?
Right.
The thing is, any tire that's on the market is going to be designed with at least a consideration to ETRTO standards. ETRTO standards exist to basically say which size tire should go on which size rim in terms of width. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the tire you're mentioning, which I'm not going to mention, but we did earlier, is that was designed 20 years ago on a 21 millimeter internal rim, and 21. So now people are running 30s. 35s is the standard. 30s like pretty much the standard now.
Right.
So
That's
I
what I've
mean,
got on my
like,
bike.
yeah, you know what I mean? So what usually happens is you take a tire that's older like that, you put it on a wider rim, and the tire itself gets really wide, and actually the profile gets very square. But the reverse is true too. If you take a modern tire and then put it on an old narrow rim,
Which is what I
realize
did.
right, that tire was designed to measure a given width on a wide rim.
Mm-hmm.
So if you put it on a narrow rim, it's going to get narrower, and the only way it can get narrower is by, folding that bead closer together because that rim's narrow, and the entire pattern then has to then wrap around the casing still, right? So it's going to get a really, really round kind of profile as a result. I'm not surprised it didn't work well in their defense. You always want to like think about how wide the rim was, what's it intended for, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so you got to set some expectations there, I think, in their defense.
Okay, so I understand the advantage of the cornering channel. I mean, and maybe what I'm thinking is, okay, maybe the experience I had is just I just made it too wide because of the rim. Sure. I made it too round. But let's talk about this whole tire profile thing.
Sure.
And I'm gonna kind of touch on width along with that, because I think the trend for the last couple years is like, everybody wider's better up to like 2.6. So I'm trying to think what we should touch. Let's touch on, I guess, profile first, round versus square. Kind of what are the advantages and disadvantages to each?
Sure.
Because I've had, the tire, like I said, that the tire I've had in the past pretty round. Then I had the Michelin Wild Enduro, and that thing looked like you could put a level across it because the side knobs were stuck up so much. And now I'm somewhere in the middle, and I'm probably going to end up on a Martello, which I don't really know how that's going to pan out on a 30 millimeter rim.
Yeah.
But kind of go through profiles and why you would want to more square, more round.
So again, look at the spectrum, right? So if you look at like road tires all the way to downhill mud tires in a spectrum, road tires are very round. Mud tires for downhill especially are quite square. And so what is the advantage? So cross-country tires typically have smaller knobs and a more round profile. It's all about maintaining speed. If you can imagine you're riding like on a trail and you're going to not a crazy corner, but just like a controlled corner, and you don't hit your brakes, and you have cross-country tires on versus like a super aggressive mud downhill tire, your bike will actually slow down with a more aggressive tire with taller side knobs with a more square profile, just because there's more resistance as you get over to that part of the tread. Where if you have a more round profile, you're not forcing that tread into the ground as you corner as hard. But that can be an advantage on the flip side if that's what you want it to do. So like obviously with softer terrain like mud, right? The tread actually sinks into the terrain. It's not a surface phenomenon like the rocks we talked about earlier. So basically, by having a touch more square profile, you're actually forcing that tread into the ground to then create traction, particularly because oftentimes there's like a slippery layer on top. So you want to kind of puncture through that and then really claw into the terrain. And by having a square profile, your side knobs engage sooner in the lean angle. So all of that happens a bit sooner. I don't know if you've ever had that instance where like you're upright and then you panic and you have to throw your bike sideways and you get really hard on the side knobs really quick. Well, when that happens, oftentimes the side knobs get overwhelmed, right? Because you kind of like it shock the system in a way, right? Well, in reality, the other thing you get out of a squarer profile is you have like a progressive build. Like as you're leaning into it, because they bite a little sooner, they're not like shocked like when you get all the way to full lean angle. They basically have grabbed and they've maintained that grab,
Okay. So I would guess that kind of plays in. I don't know if the way the tires are designed, but if you design a tire, you want it to be more square, that whether you get a wider or narrower version, is it always going to be square? For example, on the Vittoria website, I was looking at the Martello, and you've got 2.35 or you've got 2.6. Now, having ridden some of my buddies' bikes, I feel like I just enjoy, and I don't know if it's my riding style. I tend to like a 2.4 over like a 2.6, a little bit narrower. kind of slice through things. But what are the actual, I would assume you make both because there's advantages and disadvantages to both. And I'm tired of hearing about only the advantages of wider tires. So give me advantages and disadvantages. If you were, about to buy a new set for your bike, would you go 2.6 or 2.35, and why?
So what I do is I put the wider one in front and the narrow one in back. I actually use one of each typically. And the disadvantage of just running two larger ones is weight and rolling resistance. Rotational weight is really a tricky thing. It's the worst kind of weight. So it's something that it's unsuspended weight. It's going to affect your acceleration. It's going to affect your braking. And so with that, I mean, there are the advantages of having the wider footprint and the larger air volume for cushion and things like this. When it goes back to deformation, like we talked about earlier, it allows the tread to deform, in a more controlled way around whatever obstacle you're trying to grip onto. There is no right or wrong. It comes down to demand. Our 2.35 is a quite, I don't know, kind of like a generous 235, I think, compared to a lot of other companies.
Be like a 2.4 for most, or somewhere thereabouts.
It depends on the brand you're talking about in comparison, but I mean, the 2.6 is literally like 1 millimeter larger than a 2.5. I mean, so it's not like it's some crazy balloony plus tire thing. It's literally, but the one thing you do get with the 2.6 running it in front is that you have a bit more open tread, a bit more side channel. So I think the profile on the 2.6 is a touch more aggressive. So a lot of people run the 2.6 in front and a 2.35 in back. We're going to talk about a tire a little later that you're not going to be able to publish until June 15th, but that tire is actually going to come in a 2.4 and a 2.6. And so, that's kind of the quick answer on that, if I answered that question.
No, you did. I think I get you. So here's one. We've touched on it a little bit, and I think this deformation idea is sort of in the answer, but I was kind of wondering what ultimately matters more, compound or tread pattern when it comes to something like roll resistance. If you put the Agaro in the softest compound you have and the Moda in the hardest you have, or however you can deal with compounds, which one's going to roll faster?
There is no clear-cut winner on that. I mean, you could have something that completely just flops over if it's a super soft compound that's not supported, or vice versa. And what happens, or at least the way I've always done it, is that you design the tread around not only the casing size, but also the compounds you're going to use. And you kind of just know how much material you need to get the flex you want. If you make something, for instance, if you were to say, I want more side grip, so I'm going to make the side knob really big, too big, and you think, oh, bigger would make it more grippy. It actually can make it less grippy because it can make it so rigid that it doesn't flex at all. You know what I mean? So there's
right.
drawbacks to going too far with this. And so there is no clear cut between tread design and compound. The correct answer is they need to be designed together.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, just putting it in visual terms, a little knob, just like a little person, isn't going to, it's going to flex easier. So you might need a harder compound so it doesn't just get smushed over.
I'm not sure I'm getting your
oh God, I'll have to edit this whole part out. So let's say a knob on an Agaro being a lot smaller in its in width than on a Martello.
Yeah.
It'd be if you had them in the exact same compound, literally the exact same type of rubber, it would still be a lot easier to flex over like an Agaro knob, just because it's...
Yeah, I mean, bottom line is like if you have less material and it's the exact same material, then it's going to be more flexible. Yeah, and that can affect rolling resistance. And likewise though, dude, if you have something that's if it's too low of a durometer, if it's too soft, right, it's just going to flop over. So there's that balance. You need to have it be supported, but you need to have it be compliant. And that's where the 4C is really exciting, because you can tune it. So we can use a different base and surface compound on every single tread if we wanted to, you know, and really work with kind of the design parameters and indicators that you're trying to really work around.
So I didn't have this question before, but since the way you described it, what does this say about when tire manufacturers, it's the same exact tread pattern and tire, but they have like 3 or 4 different compounds, but they're not changing anything about the tread design. They're just different compounds. But if you need to design them both in mind, it's like, well, is that really the best approach? I mean, I can see why you wouldn't want to, you know, tooling and all that stuff is so expensive. You want to get more out of it, but
yeah, the quick reason they do that is for cost and wear. So if you notice, Vittoria doesn't do that. We have you choose the tread based on the terrain you're riding, and we make the best version of the tire we can make for that terrain, and that's it. And so, you know, we have 2 casings. We have a trail casing and an enduro casing, which the other companies do as well typically. But my point is that by taking that same tread and then offering, like, you know, 3 or 4 different compounds in it, there's really going to be one best one, and then the other ones are made so that they don't wear out as fast. Now, the thing is, the reason they do that is because performance compounds historically have worn out a lot faster than regular compounds, right? I'm not saying that, you know, our performance compound is completely, you know, doesn't wear at all. But one thing that we were able to do by using graphene in our compound was dramatically reduce the effect of abrasion on the tread design. So it wears slower. And we made it roll faster because of the elastomeric properties of that compound. And then also with 4C, it's supported from the base, and then, you know, the upper portion of the knob that actually makes surface with the ground, it's still nice and super tacky, right? So you still have the feel of a really tacky, grippy tire, but you removed all the wear points. And so for that reason, we can really just offer the 4C with graphene, and it's not a problem. We don't have to offer like 4 different compounds in each tire to try to give you some sort of perceived value in terms of wear.
All right. I'm going to speed this up a little more rapid fire. Okay.
Sure.
Here's a real philosophical question that I've learned enough to where I think I could maybe sort through this myself. But when it comes, this is going to be my last rolling resistance question, promise.
Yeah.
Rolling resistance in some situations is obvious, right? If you're riding down the pavement, down your street, and you swap your mountain bike tires, the difference is probably going to be pretty obvious. If you're running, you know, something like a cut spike in like grass where it's really grabby, you know, or tacky dirt where it's digging in versus not, it's probably going to be pretty obvious. But is there ever a situation where it doesn't matter? Like, for example, you know, if you're in loose over hard, so you've got like rocky pebbles everywhere and it's kind of dry and dusty, I wonder, you know, maybe it's a different kind of rolling resistance with the deformation. You know, on hot asphalt, it feels like you can feel that stickiness. But in some situations, I wonder, it's like, well, does it even matter the compound, because it's loosey-goosey, but it's relatively firm. So I'm not really digging in, but I'm never just planted. Is that, you know, is there ever a situation when rolling resistance is kind of like going to be pretty much the same, or does it always matter?
So I like to think it always matters. In reality, it doesn't always matter, but I design around as if it does always matter, so that if you know, the tire is more versatile in that way. So it's kind of a design challenge. But basically, like if you are, you know, in a situation where if you're downhill racing, particularly, you know, downhill racing, you're not climbing. So downhill racing is a lot about grip, and now rolling resistance does matter, especially on like harder packed courses and things like that. But at the same time, you know, those races are going to be won and lost in the corners, and just trying to stay upright. So ultimate grip is going to be the thing. Likewise, though, like, I mean, I said this on a video I did the other day for Vittoria. You'll see it on our Instagram this week probably, but we're talking about like cross country tires, and somebody asked, what is the fastest cross country tire? And I said, define fastest. Fastest is the shortest amount of time it takes for you to ride a given course, not your ultimate speed, right? Unless that's what you're going after. Falling's not fast. If you're riding a slick tire because it rolls faster, but you're riding in a loose terrain, that's not going to be fast. Just the same as a really aggressive tire is not going to be fast on pavement. So you got to consider that.
Right. All right. Before we get into some of our listener questions, so here's one for you. You're going to hate this.
Oh, great.
Someone forces you into a situation, says, listen, Ken, you get one rear and one front. Now you can buy new, like you can replace them, but it's the same tire for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. What's your go-to combo for this is the tire I'm running for the rest of my life?
So I ride like trail stuff. I mean, like I was a downhill racer, but I came from cross country. I like my bike to be lively, and I like to pop off stuff. And I ride, technical terrain, but I want it to still roll fast. So my combo is in the rear, I run an Agaro, and in the front, I had been riding the Martello, and I think that's a great tire still. But lately, I've been running the Agaro in the back, and then this new tire we're going to launch on June 15th in the front as my go-to combo. And the people who have tried it for trail use, all-around use, the tire that we can't talk about until June 15th is basically, it's a downhill compatible tread. It works tremendously well for trail and enduro, and we will be offering it in trail and enduro casings. So I would run it with a trail casing in front, and the Agaro in the trail casing in back, and I would run an airliner insert in the back as well, tire insert.
Yeah, we hadn't even touched on the airliner, but I do have a listener question about it. So I guess
Sure.
We'll transition into that. Well, before I do that, I do want to ask this. So let's say your lifetime setup, because, we'll get into this more later, but how does that new tire roll compared to like the Martello?
I mean, it's
similar. Faster.
Are we allowed to? I don't even.
I don't know. You tell me. Yeah. You're the one that works for the company.
I don't know where you're going to edit this out, but anyway.
We'll save it for the end. No, that way you don't have to worry about it. Don't worry. Just wait for June 15th, and we'll answer that question. All right.
Awesome. I think you should leave that part in, though. That's hilarious.
Oh, I'm going to. We haven't said anything I feel like we need to edit out yet.
Right.
All right. The airliner, you mentioned it. Now,
sure.
This is one just for the sake of time. I'll say people go to the Single Tracks pod because you guys talk about it a lot in there. But it's foam tire insert. You cut it to your rim specifically.
Yep.
It's got kind of a V channel on top and bottom. But the question is for me, and I've even looked at it. I looked at the weight. It seems like it's kind of in the middle of, something like Cush Core seems a bit heavier, but then like Huck Norris is a lot lighter.
Sure.
So this seems somewhere in the middle. So why would I choose an airliner over something else?
Easy. If you were to compare it to something like a Huck Norris is really a bottom-out bumper. It doesn't give like a progressive kind of damped feel. Compared to Cush Core, it's much more versatile in terms of being able to like cut it to length. So like I typically cut mine. For the listeners, you wrap it around your wheel and then you cut it and then you attach the two ends. I usually take like an extra couple inches off so that it fits super tight. So it's kind of snaps on in place. And the other reason is that we offer 4 different sizes. So, you can really tune the air pocket that way, but you can also use it with a much more broad range of tires. So, our smallest version has won national cross-country championships multiple times in various countries. So, in fact, I think it almost matters more in a cross-country tire than it does in a gravity tire because the system is so much more lightweight and small, right? You have a lightweight tire, which flexes more and a much more, really just a lightweight wheel that's more narrow. And so having that protection actually really matters as much, if not more, in that way. So
there's just less. There's less there to absorb the energy from all the impacts. I remember listening to you talk about that and it does actually make a lot of sense.
The foam itself is EVA foam, which is the same that's used in the sole of a running shoe. So it is not a pool noodle. It happens to be bright green, but it is not a pool noodle. It's made to last over 2,000 hours of use. I mean, so it's the longest use of any of them on the market. And it adds about 85 grams. It's not a big deal.
Now, is it so if you cut it tight, let's say I get it real snug against my rim, I can definitely see the advantage of that giving you some extra sidewall support, even if it's not designed to push against the sidewall. Well, if your sidewall is flexing from one side and pushing the tire to the other, but there's something in there holding it up, it seems like you'd be actively engaging that outer sidewall, not just the inner where you're cornering, just by virtue of having that liner in there.
You're basically forcing the beads apart and staying in the channel of your rim is what you're doing. And then the other thing is because as you mentioned earlier, the liner itself has a V channel groove in the top and in the bottom. The bottom one allows for full compatibility with valves on the market, so you don't have to change your valve. But the top one allows for not only a little bit more space in that tunable air pocket, but when you actually bottom it out and you hit the liner, it compresses in a progressive way. So if you look at the material on either side of the top groove on an airliner, there's sort of a triangle on either side, and it comes to a point, right? So the first thing that is going to compress is the tip of the point, and then as you compress it further, the material gets wider. So it really feels like you have an extra inch of suspension in your wheel. I live in New Hampshire, the granite state. I have these granite steps in my front, and I'll just ride my bike right up the granite steps with lightweight XC wheels, and it just eats it.
I wonder, is it flexible enough? How's the install Now, if you run it looser, I feel like install will be absolutely no problem whatsoever. But if you run it pretty snug, does it get a little tricky, or is it just get the bead down in the bottom and you'll be fine kind of deal?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is a smidge tighter on the install, but not by much, honestly. The install video that we have on YouTube shows Jeff Lanowski putting this in for the very first time, and that video is 2 minutes long. So it's really because of that bottom groove that allows for any valve to be used, you can actually cheat on the install a little bit, because you can actually put your rim wall in the groove, which allows for more slack as you go around to the top. And then once you put the top in the belly of the rim, then you can go back around the other way. And so it allows for a really easy install in that way.
Okay. All right, let's get into some questions that were sent to me. And with some of them we've covered already, advantages of graphene. We talked about that a little bit already. So I actually have a question from some cross-country guys.
Sure.
One guy is wondering if his name's Luke, and he's wondering if there's anything in the works to make something that's a little bit wider of a gatto or gatto. I don't know how they pronounce it. He really likes that tire. Said there's something about it that's very unique because of the, I don't know, almost looks like micro siping on the top of the knobs.
So a lot of what I did with the Agaro comes from the Gatto. And if you want it slightly wider, then I think he should really try a 2.35 Agaro, especially in the front, for cross country. That's immediate solution right now. I will say that, and I haven't actually told anybody this yet, but later in the year, we'll be expanding our XC race casing tires to 2.35 within the Mezcal and Barzo. So
you heard it here first, people.
You heard it here first. If you are an XC person and you want a little bit more volume, but you still want a lightweight casing, that XC race casing, you'll be able to get that in Mezcal and Barzone at 235 later this year. But in the meantime, for Luke, I would definitely try a 2.35 Agaro, because that micro siping, if you like that on the Gatto, it's all over the Agaro, and it's already a wider footprint for you.
All right. I had a question from another guy about So, and this is not my world, and I don't even know if this is technically fat bike or if this is plus bike, but he's asking your opinion, on running something like the Bomboloni or the Cannoli, which seems to be a 3.0 specific pattern versus like going down to like a 2.8 Martello.
Sure.
And sort of how would you go about deciding
it's
which
an
one to
excellent
choose?
question, actually. Bomboloni and Cannoli were basically made to be full-size plus tires, that 3.0 like you mentioned, which is to say they're like a miniature fat bike tire, right? So when plus tires came out a number of years ago, they, obviously they sit between kind of like normal size range mountain bike tires and fat tires, and they kind of pull a little bit from both. Bomboloni and Cannoli are definitely more on the fat bike style end of the spectrum, which is the reason that we offered some of our more popular tires in a larger plus size casing, like that Martello 2.8 or 2.6, or the Barzo 2.6, or things like that. And so what you get by running, say, a Martello is a much more aggressive profile, going back to what you said earlier, and a much more supported and aggressive side knob. So if he's running a plus tire like a Bomboloni or a Cannoli for the cushion and the volume and the snow traction, because you have a wider footprint, you can run it at a really low air pressure, then that makes a lot of sense. If you're running it because you want a normal feeling tire in a larger size, then you should run the Martello.
Gotcha. All right, here's the question my buddy Andy, he actually sent. He's a good friend of mine, and he said, you want 50 or 100 questions? I said 50. He literally wrote 50. He's new to biking anyway, so a lot of them didn't necessarily make sense, but I actually answered all 50, but I pulled out a few and said, well, that's a good question for Ken. And this is one I have as well that I've wondered about is storage and dry rot. How long can you keep a tire either on a bike? I mean, hopefully you just ride it into wear and need to replace it long before dry rot would ever become an issue. But if you keep a tire in a cool, dry place out of the sun or whatever, how long can you have one sitting there before it's like, hey man, that you probably need to.
It depends on the tire, and it depends on the brand and the quality control and the materials that were used. Is it a synthetic rubber or a natural rubber? Things like this. I can tell you that when I go to Italy and I go to our warehouse there, they have GX tires from the 90s still there. I have a pair of them I brought home because they're just cool looking. And
are they still squishy and good?
And yeah, totally fine, because they were stored correctly. I will say this as a caveat to that: in this day of tubeless, if you store your bike like on the off season or something like that, or if you don't ride your bike for a while, dry rot's not going to be the issue. Dry sealant is going to be the issue. And so
absolutely. I've peeled it out of my brother-in-law one time had a bike that sat for like several months, and I knew it was going to be bad. And I was going to give him a more aggressive tire for the front anyway. And when I popped off the tire he had there, I peeled out like a puddle glob that had dried that was like, half an inch thick it was just solid from sitting there. So even my bike, if I go more than like a day or two without riding it, I'll just go down to the basement and just spin the wheels and then walk away, because I'm like, well, just keep it moving a little bit.
It's not a big deal, but if you think about it, like sealant is designed to cure when it hits air. Well, your tire is inherently porous because that's why you need to top up the air every once in a while, right? So you have to basically think about that, and usually I say you want to refresh your sealant every 6 months at a minimum.
Okay. He also asked, and I think we've pretty well covered this just in a roundabout way, about I think a better question is intended use affecting air pressure. He asked about, does tread affect air pressure? But I do. Maybe a better question would be, this balance. Let's take it even just from like a purely cross country point of view. This balance between roll and comfort, but you get too high, maybe you get kickback, but you get too low and you're, I guess I'm asking, is it not so simple as more air is always faster or less is always better?
Again, You got to define what fast means to you, right? Like if whatever you're trying to overcome, if you're riding on the road, put more air in your tires because you're not worried about, your tire's never going to dig into the road, right? So you never have to worry about that. Whereas if you're riding in like loamy terrain, like you're going to want to run enough pressure to be stable, but low enough pressure to have deformation to make sure that your tread can grab on. So yeah, and then as far as like tread affecting air pressure, like if you were to have like a super solid thick slab of tread that was like just one, like didn't have any voids in it anywhere, you could make a case that it might lose air slower because it's less porous, right? But like you're kind of splitting hairs. It's not going to be dramatic.
So here's a question I didn't think of earlier, which seems obvious because I know we're like backtracking, an hour's worth of time, but this cornering channel.
Yeah.
How do I phrase this? I mean, I guess it depends on how it's done, but I'm almost thinking, well, if that's the way to get that good grip hold, why don't we design every tire with more of that, or at least that same amount?
So that you got to remember that assumes that your side knob is going to actually dig into the terrain and sink into it.
I got you.
So it doesn't work on every single terrain. Like, you'll never see that on a road tire, right?
Well, you know what though? I see it. It seems like it's always on what's usually labeled as a hard pack tire. Maybe that.
Yeah. So it's tricky. So like for instance, the Morsa like has that for and what happens there is that where there's hard pack on some situations, there's also loose over hard pack. And so you want to have enough void for that loose stuff to kind of evacuate. And so there's a big enough block to have surface area, but there's also enough room for the loose stuff to kind of get out in the sand and get around stuff.
Okay, I gotcha.
Yeah.
Had one friend, my buddy Grant, looking for anybody to sponsor. I don't know if you guys have like amateur rider programs.
That guy a contract. That's all it takes. Perfect. Yeah. Nah, if he hey, listen though, in seriousness, we do have a sponsorship season at Vittoria. And so definitely, Grant, if you're serious about stuff, send us a resume. Usually around September. October 1st is usually our drop dead deadline. And we also do a tester program with a lot of our new tires, just to get people who are interested to give us real world feedback. So definitely contact us around September.
I will do that. No. Well, but you know what? I think this does in the motocross world back in the early 2000s when I was racing all the time, a lot of companies, almost every company had some sort of, they'd have different levels of program, but maybe you didn't get free product. Maybe you got a little bit of free product, or maybe you just got a discount, whether it was 10, 20, 50%, but hey, that, whatever level you're at and however good you are at promoting and getting your name out there, 50% off is a lot depending on what you're buying. That can add
Absolutely.
Up real fast. So I think in the mountain bike world, I don't know, because I haven't really tried any of that, but I just know it's not as common, at least in my experience. So I'd say people need to, if you're racing consistently, or you have I guess nowadays having a YouTube channel or strong social media presence would be where you're looking maybe even more than race results.
Sponsorship changed a lot. It used to be like, where did you finish in the Norba series 20 years ago, right? And now it's much more about awareness and how to help us validate our claims and products and make it such that your adventures really make it, or our tires help make your adventures possible in a way.
All right, so here's a question about me. Did we get as nerdy as you thought we were going to? If not, I'll dig even deeper here if I can, but I'm not going to be satisfied.
Turn up the nerd.
Well,
turn it up.
We're going to turn up the nerd, but unfortunately for our listeners, at this point, I'm going to be ending this round of the podcast, and you will have to tune back in on June 15th because we're going to talk about a new tire that's coming. Once the embargo lifts, we'll talk about it. But from what I hear, it's I don't know if revolutionary might be. I don't want to oversell, but it seems like I can say a lot of all the things Ken has learned over the past 2 decades are being applied. Is that fair to say, or did I need to delete that out of this?
I think that's fair to say, man. I think people are going to dig it. So far, the testers have been really into it, and you'll see a whole lot about it on June 15th, pretty much everywhere you look in mountain bike media.
All right. June 15th, you heard it. That's when I will drop the part of the pod I can't tell you about right now. But what I can tell you about right now is down at Shepherd Mountain in Ironton, I met with the trail builder today after Ken and I recorded this podcast. And no exaggeration, if Alex builds even half of what he wants to, we're going to have some true out west, long run, steep, scary, make you wear all the pads, full face helmet, buy downhill tires, scary downhill runs right here in Missouri, and I can't wait. Thanks for listening, and we'll get you a new podcast next week.